It's 5 o'clock in London, it's midday in New York, it's midnight in Hong Kong, 4 a.m. in Sydney, 9 a.m. in San Francisco, and 10:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Patrick L. Young, the IPO-VID live stream, Series 33, Episode 1. That makes it in the aggregate. IPO-VID Episode 193 starts here. Mega shock in southeastern Europe as the Slovenian government has refused permission from the Ljubljana Stock Exchange owner Zagreb Stock Exchange to be acquired by the Croatian government vehicle FINA. That's quite a shock all round. Meanwhile, Six Group in Switzerland, they're weighing pan-European SME exchange acquisitions. And the Six Group is setting its sight on small cap European expansions. Euronext have announced the success of the voluntary share exchange tender offer to acquire Affex. They've got 75% at the end of the day, quite a remarkable number, much better than they'd been anticipating just a week ago when they were willing to settle for 50% plus one share, not quite 100%, but at pretty much 3/4, a lot better than anticipated. And the SGX Group, they had an incredible deal this week to introduce a global listing board in a landmark partnership with NASDAQ. In our opening segment, this is really heartrending, ladies and gentlemen. Our condolences to the family and colleagues of the incredible Cassandra Sayer. RIP, a peerless figure as head of international capital markets at NYSE and a stunning role model for women in finance. Cassandra was our guest when we had the opportunity to have our show in the library of the New York Stock Exchange on just after July the 4th last year. And it's really worth watching. An incredible conversation between two amazing minds, Cassandra Sayer and my wife, Pat Young, as well as yours truly. I have no doubt whatsoever that the management of heaven is looking up this week with those two dynamic women in situ. RIP, a great woman, Cassandra Sayer. Our guest today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about the Scrappy Entrepreneur, Véronique Peiffer, a PhD as an entrepreneur and life sciences professional who co-founded and led Palm Co., a company focused on the development of therapeutic bioelectronics, a pivotal experience that serves as the primary inspiration for her book, The Scrappy Entrepreneur. Véronique, these days, is a product director at Genentech, Inc., and teaches the next generation of health tech entrepreneurs as an associate director of the Stanford Mussallem Center for Biodesign. Greetings, Véronique. Welcome to the show. Where in the world are you today?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Patrick. You can find me at the moment in South San Francisco, California. That's the city that you would land in when you want to visit the Silicon Valley or the San Francisco Bay Area. Also the birthplace of biotech, which is the company I'm in right now.
The birthplace of biotech. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, a lot of people think about Silicon Valley because of the Silicon Association, but actually the biotech business possibly been the greatest invention from Silicon Valley.
I would agree on that. Yes. I mean, a lot of investments happen here, and biotech does typically require a lot of investment. So that's why you can find us here.
No, it's quite incredible altogether. So tell me a little bit. I mean, first of all, before we even get you to Silicon Valley, we all detect a little accent there. Where were you born, and what is your origin story in the dynamic, pulsating United States of America, Véronique?
So I'm originally from Belgium. That's where I grew up. Despite my first name being a French name, I'm a native Dutch speaker, Flemish, which is one of the two top key languages in Belgium. I actually spent a couple of years in the UK as well, but then about 10 years ago now, moved to the United States, to Silicon Valley, for a fellowship at Stanford University, focused on biodesign or medtech innovation.
Wow, phenomenal altogether. So you've been in the USA then only a matter of a few years?
That's right, yeah. Pretty much exactly 10 years today.
Wow, 10 years today. That's quite remarkable altogether. So tell me, I mean, a little bit about how your journey began, not just first of all, how you got into biotech.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think when I needed to decide on my studies, I knew I wanted to focus on in healthcare, like what you do with your career. If you can do something that actually means something that is going to be meaningful to people, and for me to patients, then you know what you're working on is going to be worthwhile in the end. And so I knew from the start that I wanted to work in healthcare. I could have chosen the more straightforward path of becoming a doctor, but one that maybe the studies seemed a little more, I wouldn't say boring, but plain to me. And then I actually also, I think the job becomes very repetitive over time versus, so I ended up studying mechanical engineering. I ended up getting a PhD in cardiovascular flow mechanics because of a fascination for flow, and then applying that to the body is what led me to flow mechanics of blood flow. Then I spent some time in management consulting with McKinsey and Company back in Belgium. And so it was all these things together. So my interests in healthcare, my background as an engineer, my interest in business and strategy consulting has led me to combining these things together. And I ended up coming across a textbook. I decided medical devices seemed like the right place to be for me with this background. On Amazon, I found a textbook called Biodesign, The Process of Inventing Medical Technologies, I believe is what the full title is. It's like this big book, and I read it from start to end. And I realized there was a process for innovation in this space, and it's being taught at Stanford University. So I ended up applying for this program to learn really about how do you innovate in this space that is so complex. It's not just about coming up with a good ideas, and also trying to find a market for it with the regulatory constraints that come up with the reimbursement path that you need to understand. Biodesign taught me that really well. And that's what there is where we came up with the idea of what became Palm Co.
So very interesting. I mean, obviously we come out of predominantly wholesale finance, and we're always interested in a good entrepreneurial story. My late wife and I, we were very involved in startup communities around the world, etc. But as somebody who spent a lot of time in wholesale finance, I found it amusing that we managed to get to minute 6 or 7, and suddenly you're talking about the constraints of regulation, and we haven't even hit finance. But it is interesting. I mean, medical regulation strikes me as being mind-bogglingly complex, even for those of us who've lived our lives under the SEC, the CFTC, and 1,000 other acronyms.
Yeah, I think we always think of our world as the most complex one, but then we realize there are other very, very complex areas out there as well. And that holds for me as well, not knowing that much about the stock market, I'll say. But yeah, really complex, right? And like what you do here in the US might not matter for Europe, might not matter for Asia, and so on. So you really have to understand, even before you come up with a solution to a problem, understand what might be the regulatory constraints here. And with that in mind, can you build a business that can be sustainable over time, keeping in mind that you'll have to go through lots of hoops and hurdles to be able to get your product to market?
Yeah, and I mean, also one thing I suppose that strikes me is that the sheer number of delays. I mean, at least in the financial markets world, theoretically, if you've got a product or idea and it fits in with the pre-existing notions, then there's a relatively simple pathway, which is sort of 0 to 6 months to 12 months to maybe 3 years at the worst. Mm-hmm. But trying to move things through in biotechnology alone seems to me to be many, many years of just grappling with regulation, even after you've done the hard science.
Correct. And I think that's also where then the need for investment comes in, right? Sometimes in fintech, you can, or in software, you're able to prototype something and try and understand if there is a customer for it. In biotech and medical devices and life sciences more broadly, you can't just bootstrap without any external money that is coming in, because you have to first spend millions trying to overcome these hurdles, trying to do the clinical studies, clinical trials that are going to be needed to convince the regulatory bodies that your innovation is not just effective, but also safe. And on top of that, and on top of the regulation, then comes the reimbursement angle. You also need to then convince those insurers in the US, there are many of them, that your technology should get reimbursed. Because if you don't have the regulatory approval or clearance, and then on top of that, the insurance to make sure that people can get access to your therapy, it's just not going to get adopted.
Wow, that is super complex from start to finish. So explain to us a little bit. You mentioned the fact that this path, you ended up with the idea of palmm. So what was the idea behind that company?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I did this 1-year fellowship at Stanford, it's a really nice program. They take 12 people each year. Everyone has a different background. They're clinicians who participate in this fellowship. They're engineers, and they're people with business backgrounds, and many will have a couple of different angles to that they bring to the team. And then you get a month first with a badge to the hospital, and they tell you just go out there and find problems. So you end up spending about a month just looking for issues, and you'll come up with 100, 200 unmet needs, as we call them, that you think are worth solving, or at least there is some inkling that, hey, there are problems here. And then you spend another couple months assessing, not even solving these problems, but just looking at all the things that I just mentioned. What would be the regulatory landscape? What would be a path to getting this covered or insured? As well as like, what is the IP landscape? Are you going to be able to protect your idea? So you do all of that on these 100, 200 ideas to whittle it down to maybe 4, 6 kind of subset of these ideas that you think have legs. And then is what you start trying to solve some of them. And of course, there you're also going to come up with different concepts. Some of them might be ridiculous. Others might have some more legs. And so we went through that process, but actually, also nights and weekends, we were doing this with one of my roommates. We put our own personal medical issues on the table as well. And he told me about his problem with excessive sweating, excessive hand sweat specifically. It's also a medical condition. It's called hyperhidrosis, or pulmonary hyperhidrosis in this case, excessive sweating of the hands that happens because of an overactivity of the sympathetic nervous system. So the nerves kind of are overfiring, even though they really shouldn't. And it's a problem that occurs more often than people think. So that's the problem that we set out to solve, making sure that people who suffer from this problem aren't bothered and constrained, don't feel constrained anymore by it in their day-to-day life.
Wow, that is quite a remarkably, well, it's a remarkably niche issue, but it's also, I suppose, a case of where we are in modern medicine and biotechnology when you're looking for these things. So
yeah,
tell us a little
niche,
bit.
I'll say, Patrick, it's niche, but it's just about 5% of the U.S. population actually suffers from it somewhere in their body.
Wow.
For hand sweat, it's 2% of the U.S. population, and it's more prevalent in Asian populations. There was a genetic component to this, so it's actually, yes, it's niche, but it's probably less niche than people think it is.
Wow, that is quite incredible when it's affecting that size of the US population. I mean, and it's also, let's face it, that's a huge number of people, because I mean, you're talking about the population of Estonia or something. I mean, if not larger, in one fell swoop. It's not quite, population probably one of the larger cities or two in the Netherlands. Yeah, it's fascinating. So tell us a little bit about, I mean, the journey. Then obviously, how did it go?
Yeah, so this is where you arrive in the US, in Silicon Valley, and you think you meet these amazing people. Right? You meet people that sell their companies for over $1 billion, people that are getting investment from VCs, like a couple $1 million at a time, and you know these VCs as well. So you kind of get this picture of you'll get all this money, and then you'll just hire the team and start running. And so I met all these people, but I also met a really large group of other people that were having a very different entrepreneurial journey. They were sometimes living out of starting these companies out of their living rooms, sometimes working in hospital basements to start their companies, using pitch competition winnings, using grant funding to move their companies to the next stage. And so I realized there is these two different paths, and frankly, the people doing one or the other, it's not that I could really tell them apart. Both groups, incredibly savvy people, very knowledgeable, but just not everyone lives that path of getting the millions of dollars in right from the beginning, and then building a big team right away. So I ended up living that second part as well. So we ended up starting the company with some pitch competition winnings. We were successful getting into a prestigious medical device incubator here in the area. And then we got initially some grant funding, and then after that got some angel funding as well. But I definitely lived, and that's why the title of my book is The Scrappy Entrepreneur, because we really had to be scrappy to be able to get as much as possible done with with a small budget in the end. And that's the story that I feel like isn't always told, but is much more prevalent and not necessarily less successful.
Yeah, I mean, this was the point. Pardon my cough. Maybe there's a biotechnology device for that. It's the legacy of Chicago last week. I thought it was really, really inspiring reading your book, because it is so frustrating that the conventional simple path of you head out, you meet a bunch of bros, white blokes talk to white blokes about being white blokes, they give you $10 million and suddenly you're laughing, and then you become a unicorn and everybody lives happily ever after, until they probably reach humongous divorce settlements, because this is America. But it is quite incredible, because truly, first of all, the vast majority of companies never become unicorns. And second of all, the vast majority of entrepreneurs somewhere along the path usually have to be scrappy, if not scrappy all the way through.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And as you mentioned, the problem that we were solving, it was not one that everyone suffers from either, right? Like, that means that we didn't want to get also $100 million for this problem, because then the exit wouldn't really be worth it anymore for anyone. So we also knew that we had to, if we wanted this to be successful, that it would actually be better to take in less money and get a sizable multiple afterwards on a smaller amount.
Yeah, and I mean, being scrappy therefore does give you a huge number of advantages, which I think is one of the things that does come through in your book that a lot of people don't think about, because people do just think that they want to have the casual comfort, the comfort blanket of having some VC, preferably a named VC, one of those great A16Z or somebody like that, behind them, because that gives them a calling card into the next level. But actually, for most people at some stage, it's really, really important to try and be scrappy.
Right. Yeah, I would agree on that. And again, like, as I was starting on my journey as an entrepreneur, I read up quite a bit. I like reading, understanding what other people have done and learn from it. And I felt like I'd come across a couple of really helpful textbooks. Lean Startup, I think, is always the one that gets mentioned first in this area, which is really helpful. Talks more about, and not really about the company stage, but more about an aspect of how you do innovate. There are other books as well that more kind of are focused on fundraising, that are more focused on building teams. Often those start with that idea of, I already have 10 million, already have proven myself in certain regards. That's where they start. And then the book tells you more about what to do next. But I felt like there wasn't a lot explaining really the early stage of having to be scrappy and having to really tell your story, and even if you don't have any funding in a bank yet, or even if you don't have that team yet, that will look really credible on your page. So that's what I have focused on.
So given you had a background with McKinsey, I'm quite interested. Did the scrappy entrepreneur concept not seem somewhat like anathema compared to the amazing corporatism of what was your previous employer in Belgium?
Good question. I think actually, even as a consultant, I would say you have to be scrappy sometimes. There is a lot of good resources out there that you have access to, but you're also trying to do a lot in a short amount of time. And I think one aspect of being scrappy is just figuring things out for yourself. If you know that you have 24 hours to ask a question or to answer a question, whether you're a consultant or an early stage entrepreneur, sometimes you have to roll up your sleeves and just try and do it yourself instead of waiting for the best attorney that can answer the question for you, right? And with a bit of your own background research, you can come further than you think you might otherwise. And so I feel like certain aspects do apply even in a big company setting. And even now, I mean, currently I'm at Genentech, which is my current job. Even in this big corporate environment, just having that scrappy mindset can get you a lot further than you might think.
So it's very interesting. So go on, then tell us, I mean, what do you think are the core elements of having the scrappy mindset?
Yeah. It comes down to a couple different things in the book as well. I've kind of, there's 3 buckets to it for me as a and going back to being a scrappy entrepreneur. So fundraising, there are a couple of things that you should be doing differently if you're scrappy and you're fundraising. Building a team is going to be very different if you can't guarantee huge salaries for your early on employees, and how do you convince them to join a mission that you have? And 3 is just all of the other things that get on your plate that people don't even think about. There is just so much once you start a company that you have to do yourself, because there is no one else to do it for you. And so those 3 topics is what I have focused on. Maybe starting with fundraising, I think there it's about making sure that you don't dismiss certain funding sources. I think we had initially been really successful with pitch competitions. We had been very successful with grants. Then we switched to getting dilutive funding from angel investors. And I think we were told initially, hey, maybe at this point, don't worry about these grants anymore, because now you need to go in a different path. Go focus on getting bigger checks from angel and professional investors, which turned out afterwards to be something that we shouldn't have done. We should have kept spreading our love between those different funding sources, because sometimes it's that one grant that maybe is a little constrained, but is still maybe over $1 million and can get you through the phases where you are looking for a next funding round and you're just not successful for various reasons. So just being sure that you're not just focused on one funding source, but that you're diversifying yourself, I think is one tactic to apply.
That's very good.
Yeah,
that's a very interesting point, because you look at the simple truth of the matter is survival is everything as a startup. I mean, moving forward is obviously vital, but being able to survive till the next day, because once you don't make payroll, you're done. And therefore, however you can manage to fund things short of essentially bank robbery, it's a great way forward.
Yeah, agree. And agree on that disclaimer.
Yeah, no, the disclaimer is vitally important. I mean, I'm quite happy to do pretty much anything for funding, as long as it doesn't involve an orange jumpsuit. At that point in time, I find it somewhat challenging, but in the short term, you've got to go. So, I mean, it's very interesting. You talk about, obviously, the biotech field is somewhat different to, say, a lot of other areas, like, say, financial technology, fintech, because you're talking about, there are quite a large number, clearly, of grants to go around.
That's right. Yes, and I have written a book from a healthcare perspective. I think a lot of what I say will apply to other fields as well. But yeah, there will be differences, right? And I having not lived the different paths, I sometimes might not know where kind of there are caveats that you need to put on other stories. But I would say there's definitely a lot of similarities in what you can do. But indeed, maybe for grants that might be different. And I don't quite know that.
I hope a bit of a mute pause there, because I'm coughing. But it's very interesting when you start talking about things like, obviously, startup pitch competitions and things like that, because those are certainly quite plentiful as you go around. What about, I mean, from a Scrappy Entrepreneur perspective, looking at things like accelerators, incubators, and so on? Do you find that's a usefully scrappy marker to go through, or are there restrictions or issues with going down that route?
Yeah, for incubators, accelerators, we have been extremely happy with the path that we went down. We applied to various incubators, like StartX would be one, staying close to the Stanford community. StartX, I think we had to apply 3 times before we were successful with it, but we were, and right afterwards, that doesn't matter anymore. The fact that you had to apply 3 times to get in somewhere. And then, as I alluded to before, we were successful at getting into a local medical device incubator called Fogarty Innovation, which was extremely impactful for us. The fact that they had looked at our unmet need, at our technology, at our team, and considered that there was there meant a lot for us to then get angel funding and get that credibility from angels that, hey, maybe we're still a small team, but this big name incubator did believe in what we had to bring. So for us, it really shifted the story for us in terms of angel investments. I would say if you're looking to apply for incubators and accelerators, and I'm sure it applies to other industries as well, is it's only going to matter if that place that you're applying to is actually meaningful in your area. If the skill sets that those coaches are going to bring you are spot on for what you're looking to do. If not, then you just risk getting advice that isn't relevant. You're probably giving a little bit of equity up for being a part of that incubator or accelerator, and it's just not worth it if then the type of things that you'll get from that incubator are different from what you need. So that's one piece of advice there.
Yeah, and I think one of the things also has been often, I mean, it's not just sectoral expertise, but also geolocational expertise. I mean, if you've got a product that you're going to launch in Southeast Asia, then with the greatest will in the world, I mean, Silicon Valley may not be the perfect place, but certainly London or Brussels or Amsterdam definitely isn't the right place to be kind of positioning into an incubator accelerator there. So, okay, so when we're looking at being scrappy from the funding side, what we can essentially say then is, you've got the opportunity to do startup competitions, pitch competitions, all of those sorts of things. There's the possibility of going into an accelerator incubator if you're in the right sector where there is grant-related funding. Grant funding can be very useful. And that all gives you a certain degree of propulsion before you necessarily have to go out there and meet the venture capital funding arm, etc.
Yeah, that's right. I would fully agree on that. I think making sure that you explore all these options and go with what ultimately gives you the next portion. Maybe it's not a year, but even a couple of months can sometimes make the difference in making sure that you get through those difficult portions of the entrepreneurial journey.
Okay, so therefore, let's look at the scrappy mindset overall, because you've alluded to it so far. We've talked funding insofar as we're discussing the Scrappy Entrepreneur here with Véronique Peiffer. But what is the issue then to the scrappy mindset holistically, and how that approaches your management as a co-founder of an organization?
Yeah, and I think it holds, again, there is the fundraising mindset, and then there's more the entrepreneurial mindset to have. On the fundraising side, I would say stay positive. You might get 100 no's before you get a yes. Make sure that you're weathering that storm and be okay with those no's, and see it not just as a closing door, but as an opportunity to get to the next step. So just don't worry, be happy. I think that the checks that I got, at least from angel funding, came from very unexpected places. And that's because I was open to talk with, whether it was actually a person who had been really successful in fintech and didn't know anything about medical devices, but they suffered from this medical condition, all the way to someone in their 80s with a ton of experience in this field, very entrenched into it, an amazing individual as well. So just be open to it, and don't worry when you get those no's. Kind of keep telling your story and trying out various ideas before you do become successful. And then just in general, the entrepreneurial mindset is about just making sure that you try everything, you roll up your sleeves, you do what you need to be able to get to that next step. If it doesn't work one way, just try a different way. One thing I also learned was, before I got into it, my co-founder and I were really very rational people. And so our mindset was, we're going to give this a shot. We're going to do our best. But hey, sometimes projects fail, and we'll acknowledge that a project might eventually fail, and that's okay, right? And that is probably true from a personal perspective. But if that's the story that you bring to an investor, guess what? They're not going to be extremely interested in investing in a person that says, okay, well, there is a potential that this project fails, and that will be the end of it. Because investors want you to somewhat be irrational. Otherwise, it's too easy for someone to give up and move on to the next thing. So we learned the hard way that I don't just say we're really smart people, and we feel like when a project, there are potential endings to a project as well. It's just not the right thing to.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't possibly go into VC meetings. You have to be just the right side of Delulu, that they don't think you're certifiable in a one flew over the cuckoo's nest scenario, in order to manage to convince a lot of investors that you're all in on what you're going to do. So you can't be too rational. So therefore, you've got to be scrappy and a little bit delulu, I think, whatever way you look at it, in order to go forward. Now,
Right.
let me interrupt just at this juncture. I'm going to give you a quick break because we're halfway through our show, The Scrappy Entrepreneur with Véronique Peiffer. We're discussing today. If you've got a question for Véronique, feel free to drop one into the comments, whether you're watching us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. And indeed, also, thank you very much. I know we've had at least one person offering us a little bit of love so far today. So do drop that in, because AI bots clearly need the encouragement in order to manage to get these sorts of discussions up the ratings. And let's face it, what is better, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world, than having more entrepreneurs to drive forward economic growth? And that's exactly what Véronique Peiffer is doing with her new book, The Scrappy Entrepreneur. Let's talk about our book of the week this week. That's Quantum Finance, Programming with Q# for Finance by Hayden van der Post, who was a guest on this show just a few weeks ago. It delves into the intersection of finance and quantum computing, offering a comprehensive introduction to Q# with a focus on practical applications. Very, very interesting. Read that all together. If you come from the world of medical devices and biotechnology, you may not be so thrilled with our core product, but of course that's what pays our bills, ladies and gentlemen. So don't forget, if you want all the news on the Bourse business daily in your inbox, subscribe to Exchange Invest via exchangeinvest.com, $499 per annum to join the exchange of information. If you're interested in our book of the week and indeed a more general macro read, don't forget we have a free weekend edition, which is not about exchanges, it's about what goes on in the rest of the business world and much more besides, and that is the EI weekend edition, and you can catch that also by signing up at exchangeinvest.com, and it's entirely free. So back to our conversation with Véronique Peiffer today. It is interesting, Véronique, when we look at what's been happening around about the overall nature of this business. And actually, I mean, we've got a great question here from Anne Berg. Hello, Anne. Lovely to see you last week in Chicago as well. Really, really a delight. Who's offering a great comment and also a question. Bravo for pursuing such a challenging career path, Véronique. In your field, what is the biggest mistake other startups make?
Ooh, well, there's definitely a lot of mistakes that you can make as an early stage startup. I mean, probably in the very beginning, it's about not really looking at solving the right problem to begin with, right? When you work in the space of biotech, as we alluded to, there are so many different hurdles to overcome. Yes, you can pivot at times, but ultimately you want to work on a problem that is extremely meaningful and that is extremely that is where that innovation is going to be possible. Thinking about IP, regulatory, reimbursement. So I think the biggest mistake that you can make in this space is starting with the wrong problem first. That makes sense. And we call it unmet needs. Like Biodesign likes to use this language of the unmet need is the DNA of a good invention. And so first, really making sure that you know what you want to work on and that you think it's once you can solve that problem, it's going to unlock everything else is extremely important.
Fascinating. And thank you very much, Anne Berg, for that great question, kind comment. We've also got an excellent comment from Andrew Paul. Thank you very much for that. Excellent conversation. Staying scrappy resonates even in the big corporate environment. I would have to wholeheartedly agree with that. I think you could be scrappy in all manner of environments wherever you're going forward. So talking about the book itself, I mean, what drove you to actually want to write The Scrappy Entrepreneur, Véronique?
Yeah, so going on in my own entrepreneurial journey, we were raising our Series A financing in the very early months of 2020. And as everyone might know, it's when a big pandemic hit all of us. So it ended up leading me to having to reflect on the journey. And I ended up just taking a notebook and wrote down a couple of things of, hey, if I have to close this company, these are the various things that I want to make sure I don't forget. These are all the surprises that came my way. We talked a lot about fundraising, but on the team front, there's a bunch of other things that I felt like as a scrappy entrepreneur, I had to do differently. And so I just I decided to write these things down in my notebook, put them away on a shelf. But then 2-3 years later, I ended up having some free time. And I decided to pick up that notebook and thought, okay, why don't I try and write this this coach for my former self, if you will.
And so, I mean, how did it feel coming back to those notes, given the fact that you had moved on in your career?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I thought, oh yeah, this all still resonates, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone on to write the book, because like all of it, and it's been a couple of years now. Many of these things are timeless, even though like things definitely changed. The environment is very different at this time. So much just continues to be true. And so I felt some timelessness, which made me realize that it could be good to share this with others starting on their journey.
And so you produced the book, and it's published, and it's in bookstores now, right?
Yes, it is available on Amazon. You can find it in other bookstores as well. Amazon is probably easiest. I worked with our publisher, Business Expert Press, which has been a great publisher in this type of area where they're focused on concise books, business books. The idea is you start in when you board your flight in New York, and you'll have finished the book when you arrive in San Francisco. And so the idea is it's concise, but it's meaningful, and it's going to help you along the way.
And so tell me, I mean, what actually happened ultimately to your startup? Was COVID the downfall of the whole business?
Yeah, it was. We did close operations of the company. Actually, the company itself is still alive. There was still really good IP that we are protecting, but the company unfortunately has no longer been active. So, and I think again that's the reality for many startups. No success for the investors, unfortunately, not for me either from a financial perspective. And I think for me the most disappointing portion of that is we aren't at the moment helping patients, right? We did some clinical studies. We were able to help a couple people along the way, but not the big impact that I was personally hoping for sure, and nor is my co-founder. But what you do still take away, and that's I want to encourage those who are starting on a journey. I hope that not so happy ending doesn't mean that people are less likely to get started. I would say on the contrary, going through that experience gives you an exponential ROI, return on investment, that you wouldn't otherwise have. The learnings, having gone through it, and just everything that you're doing in a small startup falls on you. Like whether it's HR, hiring people, whether it's R&D, maybe you have a consultant that you're working with, maybe you're doing it yourself. Like all of these aspects, you're looking at yourself and you're getting smart on, such that afterwards you can apply that in anything you do afterwards. So I would say, I'm hoping that story doesn't resonate in a way of I'm never going to do this because it's going to lead me nowhere. On the contrary, you might be successful financially and with impact for patients or other missions that you have. But if anything, you'll have learned so much in the process, and it's only going to propel your career further.
So yes, it's a career boon as you go along, even if you failed as an entrepreneur. And let's face it, how many entrepreneurs have managed to be successful at their first go? I think very, very few indeed, although they put a lot of those into the textbooks, and therefore people seem to think that that's the only way to manage to go forward. Talk to me a little bit about, I mean, how do you feel from the corporate position looking at the Scrappy Entrepreneur now? And what do you find? You mentioned it earlier, deploying Scrappy techniques within a larger company.
Yes, and I think Andrew Paul referenced it as well. There are a lot of things in a big company that you have to do it in a similarly scrappy way. The jobs I've been doing recently are actually pretty entrepreneurial, if you will. Projects that we have never done and we want to achieve in different ways. And so there was a lot of entrepreneurialism to that too, but with differences in that when here I need $1 million or $2 million, it's actually pretty easy, even though everything is relative, but relatively easy to get if I can make a good case internally. But then once you have that, you're always looking for more. You always could use more resources to get something done. And so I have found that then coaching teams and having the ability to just roll up my sleeves and say, okay, if I were to do it, how would I do it? Just help them along. It propels everyone forward, and I think teams really appreciate the fact that you're able to do that. You're able to lean in, but at the same time also enabling them to move forward themselves without help if they're able to do so. So I think it's a great way of your leadership style. I think completely changes. Having done it a scrappy way in a small startup, coming to a bigger company, you're just going to put a different twist to the way you approach things.
Yes, it definitely gives you some sort of an advantage or some sort of a different approach to how you think things through. And do you think, I mean, in order to be scrappy, is the ability of the scrappy entrepreneur to be truly a lateral thinker more than a linear thinker, or is it a mix of both?
Interesting. I thought where you were going maybe with this comment is more, as a scrappy entrepreneur, you need to be very broad in your skill sets. You need to be able to do a little bit of everything. Sometimes you go deep in one area, but ultimately you need to be able to have that breadth and not be afraid of, if there was something you don't know, okay, let's just lean in a little bit more and feel comfortable that you will be able to learn something if you just spend some focused time on it. I think that's what makes a person ultimately effective in doing new things, is being able to have that breadth, but having that willingness to go deep. And of course, like, seek expertise from others, knowing where your limits really end and where you do have to go find someone with deeper expertise. And once you can afford it, you can definitely do more of that. But so maybe I'm twisting your question a little bit to like that breadth of expertise, and then the idea of sometimes having to go deeper.
Very interesting. That's a great answer. It wasn't the question I had in mind. It's really interesting, though, because I mean, it is fascinating. You're talking about the breadth of knowledge versus where you have to be as a scrappy entrepreneur, because effectively you've got to be playing offense, defense, and everything in the middle, if you were to use American sports analogies. And I'll stop there, as I know nothing more about American sport. But if we think about it as a mindset, breadth of knowledge is one thing, but what's the actual thinking process? Is it lateral? Is it linear? Is it a mix? And therefore, you've got to be very judicious.
So you can go either. I think either way. I mean, I think there are different types of people that will approach things very differently. Yeah, if you're a linear thinker, maybe at some point you're gonna miss certain aspects of your journey. But if you're too zigzaggy, then it's going to be hard for you as well to accomplish certain things. So I think typically a mix will serve you best. That said, there are very linear thinkers that are extremely successful too. So I wouldn't exclude one or the other here.
Interesting. Very interesting. I'm just curious as to whether it applies in the medical device and biotechnology business, whether that needs more linearity than other things. I mean, certainly finance is fascinating because it needs huge amounts of lateral thinking at the points of inflection. But most people make their money by being incredibly linear indeed.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
So tell me, Véronique, I mean, therefore, you're now in your corporate career, you're also lecturing. What do you think that the future is going to hold for you? Is there going to be another outbreak of scrappy entrepreneurship or scrappy intrapreneurship, maybe?
Yeah, I think so at some point. At the moment, I'm keeping it to entrepreneurship as you're calling it there. I think so. I'm leaving it open. There are advantages of the corporate world. There are advantages of being in a very early stage startup. And for me, my career has definitely not been linear. I've really enjoyed the journey of the career. And I think that's what I'll continue to focus on, making sure that I enjoy every step of the way. And so I think that's what will make me decide if I jump back into something earlier stage, or when I jump into something earlier stage again.
Okay, and let me ask you, therefore, the zillion-dollar question, is that going to keep you, do you think, in the United States of America, or does Europe, the UK, Belgium beckon you back?
Yeah, well, we'll have to ask my parents about that. I think I know what their answer would be. We'll see, though. Similarly, it is. I think there are different there are advantages and disadvantages of both continents, especially in these days, there's special constraints on top of that. But yeah, for me, at the moment we're here, I have a family here, so we're happy at the moment where we are. But you never know what will pull us back.
I'm interested. I mean, obviously, quite clearly, there is the parental issue. I can entirely get that. But when you look at entrepreneurship, when you look at the economy, I mean, the last generation in Europe, it squeaked along over pretty much 20 years with what, 9% growth overall at the European Union level. The USA has gone 89% for growth. So does that not skew the decision? Because I personally can't really see the disadvantage to the United States of America over the USA, over the European Union at the moment.
Yeah, at the moment, I mean, and I feel like I live in Silicon Valley. I don't quite know all of the US. All of what I say is like with the mindset of the mindset that the type of people have here. Not a lot of people actually are local to begin with. Like most people have paths that have brought them to this area, and it just makes for a very entrepreneurial mindset. Even if I'm now working a corporate job, like I am still teaching at Stanford University, and I feel like that entrepreneurialism just lives everywhere. You go to a coffee shop and you're overhearing conversations of entrepreneurs with investors, and I do think that is a very inspiring environment to be in, and that's what we definitely have enjoyed over the past years here as well.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, it's so innate within everything that's going on, particularly in Silicon Valley, that everybody is working on their startup or some sort of a quasi-entrepreneurial journey as they go along. Makes for a very, very dynamic culture. Well, from one dynamic culture to another, I suppose I got to ask you that question that we always ask at this point in our show. So, Véronique Peiffer, you've mentioned the fact that you're clearly someone who works in biotech. You've been a scrappy entrepreneur. You've written the book, The Scrappy Entrepreneur, but we always finish with a financial question. So where do you think the capital market revolution goes next?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, Patrick. I was expecting it. And I will say, I can't, I will have to answer this from the outside in, right? I'm not a financial capital market expert. So I will really answer this from the outside in. And where my mind is going with this question relates to AI. Looking from the outside in, I think there's a lot of people out there not currently in the stock markets, and now they have, like, everyone has a Goldman Sachs team, like research team at their fingertips. So I do think it kind of changes the playing field for who is interested and maybe think that they have the right knowledge to start making investments. But it's not about leveling the playing field. It's probably about leveling up the playing field. Like, everyone has their information at their fingertips so much easier than we used to. So I think it does, I mean, probably in line with what you said in your original book, it's just about acceleration as a result, because everyone has that information at their fingertips right away. I think there is also something interesting around misinformation, because yes, everyone has their information at their fingertips. We're dealing with very few AI models that we're all relying on. So I'm really curious about what that's going to bring with regard to misinformation, and will there sometimes be unexpected changes in stock just because of misinformation being spread by a couple of those AI models. So really curious to see what that will bring.
In simplicity, complexity seems to be the motto for AI in so many ways, because it's going to give us so many interesting ramifications. What a fascinating answer. Thank you very, very much, Véronique Peiffer. Thank you very, very much for joining this show and talking about The Scrappy Entrepreneur. You can get The Scrappy Entrepreneur on Amazon and bookstores around the world, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great read, really, really inspirational, fascinating altogether. Thank you, Anne Berg. Thank you, Andrew Pohl, for your comments and questions. Really appreciate them today. We are going to be back next week with another interesting academic angle, this time on the human factor of trading journey with Dr. Mehmet Belgin. That's a real must watch altogether, just like today's, and I hope you will enjoy that. I want to say a huge thanks to our fabulous production team today, Jamil, Kim, and Natalie. And, well, at this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, obviously there's a big thing happening in the United States of America, which we've all got to acknowledge, because if nothing else, We've all got to give thanks, because if it wasn't for the world's greatest economy in the United States of America, everybody else would be a lot poorer. And also, just returning to the tragedy of this week in our little parish of stock exchanges, the demise of the great Cassandra Sayer. New York Stock Exchange President Lynn Martin put it beautifully succinctly. What most people don't realize is that those who work here at the New York Stock Exchange are considered family. We win together, we lose together, but most importantly, every single NYSE employee fiercely fights every day for freedom, transparency, fairness for those we are proud to call our customers. This tenacity is the DNA of the NYSE employees, not because those principles are popular, but because upholding those values is the right thing to do. This holiday season, remember that life can be fragile, and to hold your family and friends dear, and no matter what, fight for your beliefs, no matter whether they're popular or not. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Exchange Invest, on behalf of IPO-VID and all of our team, we echo those sentiments entirely of Lynn Martin in memoriam of Cassandra Sayer this week. And wherever you are in the world today, it's that week in the USA, and it seems only appropriate to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving, to those who are celebrating this Thursday, and indeed everybody else in the world, happy Thanksgiving. There may be problems, there may be issues, but there are great things to be seen throughout this world. I'll be back same place same time next week. I look forward to that. And in the meantime, if anybody wants a marketplace built, you know where to ask. I wish you all, ladies and gentlemen, a great week in life and markets. And thanks again to our great guest, the Scrappy Entrepreneur herself, Véronique Peiffer.